All right, back at it. Another episode of the More to It podcast. I'm the host, Jay Moore, with Hell Varsity Magazine, hellvarsity.com, and I am pleased to be joined by Parker Gabriel of the Lincoln Journal-Star. PG, what's happening, buddy?
What's up? How's it going?
Good. Thanks for taking the time. I know you guys have been trying to follow this. I mean, we were just chatting before.
Yeah.
Just trying to follow everything that's been going on the last 9 days. I mean, it seems things change quickly. The roller coaster has been going up and down this hole for the last 9 days. So hopefully we can kind of talk about some relevant stuff. Nothing else will change in the next 12 hours like it seems to be doing the last week and a half.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's funny. We've been having these conversations at the Journal-Star, and I'm sure Hail Varsity, Omaha World Herald, Husker Online, whatever. Everyone's having the same conversations all around the country, which is, I think even back in March when spring ball got shut down, we were worried, like, what's going to happen? What is there going to be to cover? What's it going to look like? And instead of running out of stuff happening, it's been like busier than you could imagine it being. And that's been only accelerated in the last 9 or 10 days. Or if you want to go back further than that, like 2+ weeks from the time the schedule came out on August 11th to what are we now, 21st? Yes, or 5th. Yeah. So 16 days. I mean, it's been crazy, like you say, a roller coaster. And it's pretty much covered the gambit of, like, one day you think, hey, this is really going to happen. And then the next day you don't know. And then the next day just goes back and forth. And obviously then it got shut down a little more than a week ago.
Yeah. Take me back through your kind of timeline of when you're worried about the season starting and then, oh, this is going to happen. And then, oh man, this might not happen. And then it's kind of like, because I'm kind of going through my timeline now because that's how I was. I was like, ooh, we got to clean some stuff up to make sure it happens. And, oh, students are allowed back on campus. Great. Looks like it's going to happen. And then you're like, ooh, you're hearing, the rumors. I mean, the rumors have been crazy the last.
Yeah.
But take me, what's your timeline been for we're not going to have football. We are going to have football. And oh my gosh, now we're not going to have football.
I think the first time I wondered, honestly, like the first time I really wondered if there would be football was probably like sometime in April, because when they first shut down, like when they first canceled spring ball, they canceled the NCAA tournaments, the rest of spring sports, spring championships. At that point, we're in that sort of, like, you figure that the people saying, hey, let's shut down for 2 weeks and make sure that this goes away, like, it didn't seem like that was really realistic, but I don't think anybody really thought that 5 months later you would still be in this sort of, like, that it'd be so uncertain. And so I started to wonder all the way back then, but at that point you're sort of like, oh, it's so far away. Mm-hmm. I mean, it'll probably look a lot different. And in some ways it does. Then I think, I don't know, we started to hear, like, in late June that they were going to go conference only. And that made sense. But it was sort of even just a yo-yo then of, like, yeah, I think it'll work. No, there's no way it'll work. And that really lasted until the schedule came out. And at that point, like, that was one day of really positive, like, hey, everyone thinks this is going to happen. But I think if you read between the lines or you read the context of everything that was said that day, it was still framed as, like, we're hoping. And the more I thought about it, the more coming out of that day, I was like, man, they really tried to not be too gung-ho about this. I mean, just below the television special and all of the bells and whistles of that day was this, like, Kevin Warren saying, this is a plan to get us to tomorrow. And I was like, well, season doesn't start tomorrow, so I guess we'll see what happens. So it's been, like you say, every other day you just think something different, but it's been a back and forth for, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Through this whole thing, I'm always like, why? I'm a guy that's like, why did this happen? Why did they do this? Why even, I guess, come out with the schedule? Is that just because everyone else is doing it? I mean, if you knew this was going to change, I mean, it changed so quickly. I mean, it was Wednesday, and on Saturday it was like, whoa, pump the brakes, no more padded practices. I guess, why do you think they felt like they had to come out the schedule release if their things were going to change so quickly?
I don't really know. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that the Big Ten would probably do different if they had to do it again. I don't think they would have arrived necessarily at a different conclusion when it comes to postponing, but The TV special, it was kind of weird. I mean, I get it. Like I was thinking about this because someone did it just like a day or two before that. And I was thinking like, man, I mean, every league now has these TV networks, like use it, right? Like get something out of it. But then after watching the Big Ten one, you can understand maybe why other leagues did a little bit more subdued because it just came off as this like we're sure about this. And you can say as many times as you want, like, hey, there's still a long way to go in figuring this out. But when you put it on TV and put it up on the screen of who everyone's playing, and then not only that, but like we had a long talk with Bill Moose yesterday, and he said like the schedule was literally designed so that if you had to delay it by a month, I mean, they talked about how it was like a Jenga puzzle, and you could
Mm-hmm.
take weeks worth of games and move them around and delay for weeks if you had to. And so then to not do that, like I'm not saying it would, like I think it was a defensible decision to postpone. You can agree or disagree, but you could defend it at least. But to make such a big deal about the schedule being designed to be able to start in October if you had to, and then
Mm-hmm.
canceling in the first half of August, like that just it's just weird. Like I don't know why. I don't know what the communication plan was from August 6th onward. It wasn't very good.
Right, and it's still not very good.
And it's still not very good.
Right. He's he was on right away with Dave Revson. He really didn't answer any questions then. He's finally came out with a statement. I think he was on, I don't know, I think it was Big Ten Network. He's on another TV station just the other day and kind of, danced around.
Yeah.
It's been very vague. It's been very, very vague. And I will at least I'll kind of give it to the Pac-12. I mean, they came out with something and a very, organized report, a detailed report,
Right.
for why. Who knows what we're going to get? I mean, now we have, parents from Nebraska threatening to sue because they
Yeah.
don't see what's being brought forward. I mean, that's another issue. The most with not having an answer to why.
Yeah.
What is there? What does Parker Gabriel need to hear to be able to defend the reason to cancel the fall season?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've heard a lot more in the last couple days, but you sort of have to parse it together between what Kevin Warren said and in that letter, and then also like I thought Ronnie Green on KLIN the other night was pretty illuminating. It seems to me that the reasons that the Big Ten ultimately used are similar to the ones the Pac-12 used. In thinking that even in January, the testing situation might look a lot different than it looks now. That's a fair point. Like I understand that. And then also the part that I thought was maybe most interesting was it's pretty clear that some or many of the people on the Big Ten's chancellors and president's council are worried about the potential long-term complications from COVID-19, in particular the heart-related complications. And I thought it was interesting that Ronnie Green, the UNL chancellor, said that he said, and it's based on science, and I'm guessing here, but based on what UNMC's docs, who have been very involved in this all along, have said, it seems like they're not quite convinced at this point that, I mean, I think the term Ronnie used was that those dots don't quite connect at this point. And so I think that that's an open question as to how sure are we that COVID-19 in some cases leads to heart complications. And so I can understand if you're a school administrator looking at that risk and saying, we can't take it. And I can understand if you're a football coach looking at that risk and saying, we don't even know if this is a thing we want to play. And I totally understand if you're an 18 or 22-year-old saying, I'm a world-class athlete. We should be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I can sort of see where each level of person is coming from. And ultimately the decision's made by the presidents and chancellors council. And that the thing that I wish, I guess, just as a person, is that and Ronnie Green, to his credit, like talked a lot about it. And of course, he voted, it seems, to or sure to play. So it's easier for him to go, out in public and say this is why we wanted to play. But I think that the people that voted against this, like, I'm not mad at them. Like, I'm not like it. Okay, but just like if you're a president of a public university and you made a decision that's going to affect a lot of people's livelihoods and businesses, and it's a $1 billion decision or more for the conference, like just explain yourself. That's all. Like just
Mm-hmm.
go in public and explain yourself. You work for a public university. You're a state employee. Um, Lay it out. Let's see the data. And I think I don't know. I mean, clearly there's something that scared or worried a lot of people. And like I just think that the community, it's a public health issue at the end of the day, right? Like
Right.
all of these people are saying that they're not only worried about student athletes, but there's a risk of community spread. There's risk of I mean, you see college towns all across the country. There's a lot of cases on campus as they come back. So just lay out the details. It's good for everyone to know. And I don't think there's a good defense for not explaining it. That's basically how I see it.
Yeah. The biggest thing for me is, again, for the last 3-4 months, people ask me, "You're going to play? Is he going to play?" I'm like, "Yeah," because I think I always said it's too big to fail, and that was
Right.
just coming from economics.
Yeah, right.
Big Ten money coming in, the TV revenue, the money that's brought in to the universities, the money that's brought into those cities or towns that
Yeah,
these colleges are in. And I just thought there's no way. I mean, I just look at it. I'm like, you're going to turn down a $52 million in TV revenue money. I'm
yeah,
just like, I mean, I just watched an HBO Real Sports special just a couple of years ago about how Rutgers athletic department was struggling
yeah.
financially. I'm like, I would think they would want to be able to have that money, and they do everything to get that money. I get it. I get the risk in doing that. But again, I'm like, man, that's like you are setting yourselves back years
Right.
financially in the catastrophe from all this. Maybe not be major, but it's like 2 to 3 years, 4 years down the road. How many sports you're going to be able to fund? All these
Right.
projects, not only at Nebraska but around the country. I mean, I just did a podcast with Stuart Schweiger. He lives in West Lafayette, and he's like, Purdue's building all these brand new
Yep.
facilities and all this
Yep.
stuff. And I mean, whether or not your programs make money, your football programs make money, but I just don't get it. I mean, do you know specifically if this money is still going to come in without any fall football from the Big
Yeah.
Ten?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a little bit to be determined. I know that Bill Moose sort of referenced that it's possible that the television partners, that there would still be some fraction of that money, but obviously, so it may not be zero, but obviously it's not going to approach anywhere near 52 million, and that's part of why. So I think, like this, college football players, like, you want to play, coaches, they want to
Mm-hmm.
coach, like, and as much as nobody really seems all that excited about the second semester football plan, January, February, however that looks. Like at the end of the day, like if you say, do you want to play 0 games or do you want to play in January and February? I think a lot of kids will come around to the idea of like, hey, I want to play football. And
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like that conversation is also being driven by money. Like there's no doubt about it. Like if you could play 6 or 8 games in January and February and not recoup all of the money, but let's say you could get 35 million instead of 55 million, like you're going to have to try to look at a way to do that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Nebraska's $100 million budget hole. If that $100 million budget hole becomes 65, like that's still catastrophic, but 35 million is no joke, or 30 million is no joke. And so, like, that is what you're going to have to try to do that, I think. And that's why you'll see the shift to that pretty quickly. It's already happening. And that's about, kids want the opportunity, even if it's not ideal. But I mean, that's a money conversation right there.
Yeah. What do you make of Bill Moose's comments? He says, "I thought the JV games were played before varsity
Yeah,
yesterday."
Sipple and I were in Bill's office for an hour and a half, and the thing was, Bill's such a positive guy, ever the optimist, and so I thought, and he's on a subcommittee, a Big Ten subcommittee that is looking at the scheduling models for potential second semester football, and so I thought we were going to get the big push for winter football. Here's how it can work. Here's how you can do the schedule, and I was really struck by he's just not over the fall thing, right? And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think Scott Frost and the coaching staff and the kids are either. And that's because it's just such a blow, you know? And that you could just tell that the sting of that decision and the deflation in the fallout of that decision was still really with Bill. And he didn't hide it, you know? I mean, and that frustration, you know, that's where a comment like that, I thought the JVs played before the varsity. I mean, that's just frustration with where the league is right now, and you know it's not going to go away fast. It's interesting, like Ryan Day. So after the Tuesday cancellation, like on Wednesday, Ryan Day was like gung ho. You know, he said, I gave myself 24 hours to worry about it. Now I'm all in on spring. We've got to push the issue on this. We've got to make it happen. And that's a noble stance to take. But I mean, here, like Bill was really still, I mean, he was still affected, obviously, by that decision because it's
Mm-hmm.
such a big one, and they're wrestling with the fallout within the athletic department and what it's going to look like and all that. So yeah, I think it's really just it's still it's a bitter pill to swallow, and I think it's still in the process of going down at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I did like an immediate reaction the day after, they canceled it. And I did Jason Peter, and I just like, I don't see this spring season
Yeah,
working.
right.
It's just too, I just can't. Now, they present this model of you're starting, mid-January, and you maybe move it to places of a dome.
Right.
They're talking about Indianapolis, Detroit, St. Louis. I think there was one other city in there. But I'm like, So you're telling, I mean, we love football so much, but I'm like, you're telling me we could get, if the ACC, Big 12, SEC play this fall, telling me, okay, they're going to do this, do their thing. Who knows if there's going to be any bowl games? I
Right.
don't know. But you're like, okay, that's up till December. Then all of a sudden, boom, you're getting potentially Pac-12, Big 10, I don't know, games in
Right.
January. I'm like, it's not terrible. It's just the football purists, as we all are in
Yeah. Right.
Lincoln, Nebraska, are like, this is weird. This
Yeah.
is really, really weird. But also the thing is, someone brought up, it's like, do you like the attention it takes away from the regular winter sports, the basketballs,
Yep.
and like how does that, and all of a sudden you're competing now with, Big Ten tournament, March Madness
Right.
potentially if you start then, like how does that affect everything? But there's just, oh my gosh, I mean, just I couldn't imagine being with what Bill and all these ads and chancellors and
No.
presidents have to deal with, because like we said, the field goal posts are changing not only every day, but it seems like every hour.
Yeah, there's a couple things with that. I mean, so if you start in January, like take the Ryan Day model, and that's one of them. I think that's been floated like 8 games in 9 weeks, beginning like pretty much soon after January 1st. The good thing about that is you're done by the end of February. You play a Big Ten championship game, and then you've got from like early March probably all the way until August, as a recovery period, which still probably isn't ideal, but it's maybe better than if you're playing until April. The problem with that is if you kick off Big Ten football on January 6th, you're going up against NFL wildcard weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got a month there, 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks at least, where it's Bill said yesterday, he said, outside of Lincoln, like our fans will watch Nebraska anytime, anywhere. But outside of Lincoln, like who's going to watch Nebraska and Northwestern instead of Denver and Kansas City in the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's
Right.
just, and then so if you start after the Super Bowl, then you're going probably to April. And so there's just really not, it's not impossible. Like they could do it, but there's like, not only are you competing against winter sports in your own league, but you're competing against the NFL for at least part of that, the NFL playoffs for at least part of that. And then on top of that, you've got this prospect that all of these, coaches, kids, athletic directors are faced with now, which is they're going to come back on Monday when this period of 12 hours a week opens up, and they're going to get back to work, right? And they're going to start practicing, and the ads, it's Barry Alvarez and Ward Manuel from Michigan and Bill Moose that are the scheduling subcommittee. They're going to try to figure out, hey, how can this work second semester? And they're going to put all of this legwork in, and we're going to get to November, and then the same decision, the Big Ten's going to be in the exact same spot it was in 2 weeks ago, right?
Right.
Where at some point you're going to have to make the call of like, can we do this or not? And there's not anywhere near a guarantee that the answer is going to be any different 3 or 4 months from now. And I think that that's like they're paid a lot of money, they're professionals, and they'll get on board with it. But you can tell that it's hard to gear up for that challenge of like, okay, we're starting all over and we're going to try to rebuild the whole thing, and it might just get nixed again 3 months from now. I mean, that's
Right.
tough, right? To
Well, I
wake
mean,
up in the
that's
morning and say, let's do it.
right. Who's to say the virus is any different,
Right.
in January, February, March than it is now?
Yeah.
Who's to say?
Yep.
Who knows? I don't know. I mean,
Ronnie Green's thing on that was, if there's rapid testing and if the data becomes any more clear about the cardiac side effects, like if there's rapid testing and further studies come out that cast doubt on whether myocarditis is directly linked with COVID, then that would be two major things that could be different in January. The testing thing will be different to some degree, probably, but you're still asking a lot, right? To just get to the position where you maybe say yes.
Right. What's so frustrating? I mean, but why did they have to rush into this decision?
Right. I know.
Why can't they just delay it till the end of September when everyone else is going to start playing?
Yep.
What was the whole rush? Because a lot changes. I mean, technology, now you're hearing about the saliva test where they could test the guy, in the morning, and then you can have the results back just a few hours later.
Yep.
FDA is trying to approve all that. So like that technology can prove that, like, buy yourself some more time. It was very puzzling just to say, nope, we're going to do this now. But you could just said, we're going to push things back, and you could still be in the same position one way or the other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that they could have ended up in the exact same spot. And maybe they thought that, hey, the things that we're worried about now, there's just no way that we're going to know more 4 weeks from now. So let's rip the Band-Aid off now. But again, like, nobody has explained that. So like, at least an explanation of like why the decision was made. I mean, Bill Moose said yesterday, like, we kicked the can down the road for 5 months. I just think we could have probably kicked it down the road 3 or 4 more weeks in terms of making a decision, especially because, like, we talked about this a little bit ago, like, the schedule was literally designed to collapse back so that you could start in late September or early October instead of on September 5th. They didn't want to cross. They felt like being in full pads at practice was a red line. Like, that was a risk. That was like a risk escalator that they just didn't feel like they could cross at that moment. But the kids have been working out without pads on for 2 months. So like, you couldn't have said, hey, we're concerned about, I mean, Dr. Cradaville, who chaired the committee, told me in June, each progressive step that you take, from small group workouts in the weight room to, walkthroughs 7-on-7 to full pads, each one of those is like a big step up in risk. Like, you couldn't have just explained that and said, this is the point. Full pads is the point at which we have to pump the brakes. We're going to go 2 more weeks of mini camp, see what more we know, and make a decision at that point. Like, that wouldn't have been that hard to say. And everybody would have known the exact same thing that they knew because of the rumors, which is, this thing is on the ropes. But you could have just been clear about it, and there probably would have been more understanding, at least a little bit more, I would think. So I don't know. The communication aspect of it was really bungled.
Well, I mean, when it comes to the whole full pad thing, they were still practicing. Like, they're still doing one-on-one individual stuff and practice, or even team-oriented stuff, like 11-on-11. That is no different than full pads. You're still doing one-on-one stuff. You're still right there with some guy doing one-on-one pass. You're still doing the exact same thing, except you might not scrimmage and tackle someone.
Right.
Like, you're still sweat. You're sweat, and you're breathing, and you're still doing stuff. Like, to me, that was like, I like, you can't bullshit a bullshitter, because like that, I'm like, that's no different. And to me, it's like, that was a non-factor to me. I'm like, wait, what? They can't go pads? Like, what? Yeah. They've been doing the exact same thing. They're just not doing it as violent.
Right.
They're just really not doing full tackling. Everything else is, you're doing the steps and everything. Like, it's the exact same.
Right.
And it's just puzzling to me. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And maybe to people who, I don't know, didn't participate in football at all, like, I can see that. That's like, no, you're literally doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I know. So okay. See, it seems like you're like this too. Like, when someone tells me something, like, okay, they said full pads was a red line they didn't want to cross. I try to figure out for myself, like, why would that be? But then if you reach a conclusion of like, oh, I can see how that would be, that's still not like no doctor has laid this out. Like nobody
Right.
has said publicly why. Like I played football in high school and stuff. And like, if you get hit hard, like, of course you might like, you know, like
Yeah.
you want to knock the
Right.
snot out of someone, right? Like
Right.
maybe they thought that, man, when you tackle someone, you've got a bigger ejection of stuff, right? But first of
Sure.
all, no one said that. And second of all, like the same principle applies if you're doing a blocking drill with no pads on and you get your hands up in somebody, like,
Yeah.
of course, the same thing's going to happen, right? So I don't know. Again, it all goes back to how much data and how much information do you think the league should have given? And my answer on that, probably most reporters' answers on that, but it seems in this case like a lot of fans and parents and players and coaches all feel the same way. Like the more the better. Like just lay out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not proprietary data. Like let's hear specifically why you think that full pads would be more. Like how many
Mm-hmm.
people, like, okay, if the Big Ten said we're gonna have a medical panel and they're gonna walk you through a presentation of why this step is more dangerous than the last step. Like I'd watch it. I bet you would watch it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people
Yeah.
watch it, like you want to learn, you want to know why something is the way it is. And so I don't know, like to me, like, okay, you can take their word for it or you don't have to, but more explanation would be better in my opinion.
Yeah. So I know contact tracing was a big issue, and I played golf with I won't name him, with someone that's involved in the football department just a few weeks ago. We're talking about all this, and he goes, if they are worried about contact tracing, we're screwed.
Yeah.
He said that is because you can't, like,
Right.
it's impossible. It's easy enough to do within your own program, but all of a sudden you go play a game
Yeah.
and oh my gosh. So, you had a defensive end that all of a sudden a week later test positive and they played Michigan. Well, how many plays was he involved with? Who did he tackle? Who did he hit? Who did he
Yep.
try to defend a block with? And I'm just like, the
Yeah.
frustrating thing is we've all granted, I try to stay in my lane, I'm not a doctor, but we just assume that just because you come in contact with someone or near someone, you're going to get it. Like he's on fire. And
Right.
you're covered in gasoline and like you're going to start on fire too. So that's, that's tough. If you want to use that as a reason, that's damn near impossible to do when you play against a game to do that. I would hate to be that guy to watch game film. Like, okay, he was here. He came and hit this guy. Okay, play 22. He came in contact with 37 from Michigan. Okay, mark that down.
Yeah.
Then you have to send this over, and it's like, and then now they have to deal with it and double. That's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, it is. It is, and I think that I'm sure that was part of what they just thought they couldn't handle at this point. That's another area where I think the rapid testing aspect of it could change how that works, right? Because one of the things that was really prohibitive about the medical protocols that were released the same day the schedule was that if you were deemed to be a close contact through contact tracing of someone who had tested positive, you had to isolate for 14 days and you could not test out of that isolation. So like you came in contact with number 37 from Michigan, he got it. You'd have to isolate for 14 days. And even if you tested negative over the course of those 14 days, you could not come back to competition before that time was up, because theoretically you could have the virus for 2 weeks before you test positive, even though the typical incubation period is more like 2 or 3 days. So based on what UNMC thinks. So like, yeah, that's an impossible web. And you see, like, if you watch Hard Knocks, like they've all got the bracelets on.
Yeah, the Whoop bands. Yeah.
Yeah, and that at least like it gives you a data set of who you were within 6 feet of, or who you came in close contact with. But like, it's not realistic to have. I mean, maybe the Big Ten could, provide those for every player and whatever. But I mean, you're talking about thousands of them, right? To try to track that. And I mean, Frost, it's interesting because Scott Frost has been talking about a lot of this stuff for a while. I mean, I think it was back in like late May or early June, when he said, like, how are you going to contact trace in practice? Like, we videotape everything, and it'd be
Mm-hmm.
impossible to go through and say like,
Mm-hmm.
78 went here and then he was in this drill and he stood here but only for
Right.
18 seconds. I mean, yeah, that's a mess. So I mean, there's another reason to be skeptical of the winter spring thing, right? Like, is that going to change?
Right.
What about that situation is going to change so radically that the same group that said no way is going to say like, yep, we feel good about this now?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it comes out and they have, information that's, just because you are within 6 feet of someone, like, doesn't necessarily, mean you have it, or they have more information about asymptomatic cases. I mean,
Yeah,
just hopefully there's more information than what we have now, because we have obviously loads of more information than we had back in March.
right. Or
And
maybe,
I wish they could use some of that information a little.
right. Or maybe as a vaccination gets closer, it's like it's more effective, for asymptomatic cases, like, or there's a therapeutic or something that we're like, there's still going to be people that are going to get really sick, but if you have a mild case or, you don't have many symptoms, then it's more effective or something like that. I mean, you never know. There will be advancements, obviously, but I mean, clock's ticking toward December and January already, so we'll see.
Yeah. What are Without this fall, what is your biggest concern, I guess, right now? Because we haven't even touched on what they're going to do with all these, if they get extra eligibility, the whole scholarship deal.
No. Yeah, it's a mess. That's going to be a huge mess. I wrote about this last week a little bit, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, so I think there might be final word on that today, from the NCAA. If it's blanket, if everybody gets a year back, there's only two things that could happen. One is that you are allowed to carry an expanded roster and maybe like stepping back down toward 85. But if everybody gets a year,
Mm-hmm.
you could be faced with having an expanded roster for 4 or 5 years. And if not, there's going to be a lot of hard conversations that you're going to have with kids that don't have a spot anymore. Right. I mean, like, anybody who's not a contributor, and Nebraska's got a small senior
Mm-hmm.
class. They've got like 13 scholarship seniors. So, and they're not all the way to 85 right now, but like, still, you're talking about having, like, let's say they stayed right where they are now, like 80 scholarships. You got 13 seniors, 93, so you're like 8 to 10 over, and then you're adding in a whole freshman class. I mean, it's crazy how many scholarships you're talking about. And then if after a year you have to be back down to 85, you're only losing the 13 seniors. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a real pinch for spots, and you can take the logic as far as you want. Like, one of the things that'll happen at Nebraska is it'll be harder for the walk-on kids to earn scholarships, because
Yeah.
you're going to be, instead of regularly each year having one or two or four or whatever scholarships that are there this time of year at the end of camp, because kids have transferred out or you're not quite at 85 or whatever, you're going to be over and you're going to be looking for ways to get down, which means a guy like, there's not a scholarship there for a guy like Luke Reimer. There's not a scholarship there for a guy like Trent Hickson last year. Like, if you don't start on
Mm-hmm.
scholarship, you're not going to get on scholarship as long as you have the sort of roster pinch that's. But at the same time, like, what other option is there besides extra eligibility? I mean, if you
Yeah.
tell everyone like, "Hey, sorry," I mean, that sucks. That's not
Right.
fair. So it's really just, yeah. I mean, there's no good option on that one. But if you talk to people that deal with this scholarship math, roster management, all of that, man, it is like, you pull the string, you just try to pull one little thread, and
Right. Yeah.
it's a whole ball of yarn. I mean, there's complications on top of the complications when it comes to that.
Yeah. And it's an economic burden. It's another economic burden, because those scholarships cost money.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
So if you take all fall sports, at Nebraska, or all athletes at Nebraska, you take the total scholarship money and you add 20% to it, just in scholarship money alone, it's like 2.5 million a year. So, if you have extra scholarships over the course of, and I don't think it would probably be blanket, like not every single athlete's going to use it, but I mean, I said to Bill Moose yesterday, I said, okay, football alone, I ballparked this at $1.5 to 2 million in per year if you had a roster that was expanded scholarship wise by like 15%. And he said, I think you might be underselling it. It could, it could be more than that. So yeah, I
Wow.
mean, football alone, $2 or $3 million, like normal year, fiscal 2019, the football program turned a $60 million profit. Like 2 or 3 million, I would say that'd be just fine. But
Right.
it's not a normal year. I mean, you're facing a $100
Right.
million budget hole and then having to ramp up that on top of that. Like, can you do it? Like, yeah, you probably can do it, but it's not going to be pleasant.
Right. How do you, we've gotten, the word parity comes to mind in college
Yeah.
football. And we've had it for, I don't know, last 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it fair to say,
Yeah.
That's like something people don't realize now. The Big Tens, the ACCs, SECs, the Big 12s, they'll be able to make it through those schools. But now hell, Nebraska just got beat by Troy a couple years ago.
Yeah. Right.
And like the downturn effect to all these smaller schools, the Conference USA's, there's some schools in there that'll be able to make it through because they play good football. But gosh, it just seems like we're gonna kind of turn the clock back here. Hell, you might as well go back to the mid '90s and have 105 on scholarship, and
Right. So
those small schools just come in and get their heads beat in, but they walk out with $1 million. You just don't. I just don't see some of these smaller schools being able to make it through this very well.
yeah, so before I came to Lincoln in 2017, I lived in Bozeman, Montana. I covered Montana State, and Montana State made it to the national semifinals in the FCS playoffs last year. They were really good. They were ranked number 4 in the country, won 10 games. And their defense, I mean, their defense was legit now. And their operating budget for the entire athletic department is $18 million. So, I mean, that's like, Nebraska football did 96 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're talking about a huge. So on the one hand, like if you had expanded rosters and you had to tell some kids across the Power 5, like, hey, there's not a spot for you anymore. We're really sorry. Like that could benefit schools like Montana, Montana State, North Dakota State, Ohio, Toledo, whatever. But those programs have to be around a year from now in order for them to benefit from it. I mean, they got to make it through this. So one of the things, and I don't know, to me, one thing that would make a lot of sense would be if the NCAA would approve a 13th game for next year. We got to make it to next year. We got to make sure that we can have full stadiums and all that next year. But if that's the case, like, why not? Why not be able to play week 0 or even week -1 and bring South Dakota State back in here, even though they weren't on the schedule? Like Nebraska wins. If it's a full stadium, they make $6 or $7 million from having an extra home game. South Dakota State wins because they get $600,000 or $700,000 for coming here. Like, I just think that whatever can be done, like, of course, you can't play 20 games in 2021. That's fine. Like, you can't expand the season by a month, but why not for the next 2 or 3 years, like, green light an extra game, let everyone make some extra money and start to build it back in. That might help South Dakota. Like, if you said that next week, that might help South Dakota State figure out how to get through the next 6 months, right? I mean, that might help Troy feel like, hey, okay, this is bad, but we can get an extra 2 million next year if we go play Auburn or whatever, So I don't know. It seems like there are creative solutions out there. And I actually do think in some ways the NCAA is moving faster on stuff now than you ever see. I don't know if they're batting 1,000, but they're trying to respond rapidly. But that would be one. I mean, let's have at least an extra game over the next couple of years because it can help.
Right. Bring back the old kickoff classics.
Right.
Those up in they played it up in New Jersey, or bring back. I think my true freshman year at Nebraska, we played Arizona State game week 0. We played 14 games that year with the bowl game. We didn't obviously make the Big 12 championship, but we went 7-7. But we opened up with Arizona State. Why not? I mean, that was 18 years ago. Gosh, that makes me sound really old. That was my freshman year. But there's obviously things to do. But again, it's just, to me, interesting to see just the economics of everything. Not only universities, but then those kickoff classics, they have sponsors, and if they're able to support something like that through all this as well.
I do not mean this as like a Nebraska Big 12 conversation. I think we've shut the door on that, at least for a little bit.
Right.
But I do wonder, people have asked like, hey, is this going to be what leads to an expanded playoff? Right? Probably. I do wonder about the super conference thing. I mean, this could change the equation on that. All the rights deals are coming up in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, and you do wonder if the money's right and if the uncertainty lasts for longer than the next few months. I mean, you do wonder if you get pushed toward that, having a couple of 18 or 20 team leagues and then you just base the playoff off of that. I mean, it's either going to be that or it's going to be a completely autonomous Power Five. I mean, I think it's going to go one of those two ways. There's just, like you say, there's too big a gulf between the haves and the have-nots money-wise. And, I mean, like, look at North Dakota State. Like, North Dakota State's probably better positioned to last through some of this stuff than some of the Sun Belt teams or, some MAC teams or whatever. Like, it's going to turn into an opportunity for some programs, but man, I wouldn't be surprised if it closes the door on others, and that's obviously really sad.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other podcast if we get into that.
I know, yeah, right, yeah,
that's exactly. A whole other can of worms. That'd be fun to do. All right, well, I will let you get out of here. I appreciate you taking the time because who knows what could happen in the next 5-10 minutes. Luckily, I haven't got any notifications about. All of a sudden, we've there's a 6-team Big Ten, or something, I don't know, or some guy from the yachts, throwing out some other information.
Some boat guy coming up with another rumor.
Yeah. So, Park, I appreciate you, man. Great job in keeping up with everything so far. Then
thanks.
I wish we could get together over the fall here and talk football, but I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do like a SEC conversation or something.
There you go. Yeah, at some point we'll do one of these again, and then there'll be actual football to talk about at some point. Be a good day.
All right. Yeah. All right, my man. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Jay.